Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for the Q&As, so let's go ahead and knock this out. Alright, first question. In your Basic Linear Hypertrophy Program, the workout that we have, deadlifts, should we do 1 or 3 sets? I understood 3, but I thought your stance was generally to do 1 heavy set of deadlifts in a workout because of recovery. Thanks, coach. You know what? Honestly, looking at the program, yeah, if you wanted to cut it down to 1 set of deadlifts, just due to the recovery issues involving the deadlift, that would be perfectly acceptable. And I think that we need to be willing to change on things like this. So that's perfectly acceptable, and again, it has to do with recovery. And I would also say someone could try the program and they could run multiple sets, but if they can't recover from it, they may need to cut it back to 1. And if anything, if you're struggling with recovery in any program geared around big, heavy barbell movements, cutting back deadlift volume is probably one of the best places to start, because in terms of overall volume that you can do and get away with, deadlift volume is the most difficult to recover from, so you could look into that. But outside of that, yeah, just run the program as is. But good catch, and I think that's worth doing depending upon the person. And a person could just try it that way from the start as well if they're worried about overall recovery, and then maybe ease into more deadlift volume later in it as they build up their work capacity. So there's more than one way to approach that. Alright, next question. Oh, and for those curious, when I answer questions about my programs, if you guys go check my playlist, there is a program training playlist over there among my playlists, and if you look at that, they're all free training programs in which they have videos. Some of them have articles linked and things like that, so you can go check them out. Alright, but the next question for real now. Hi Jason, hope you're having a great day. How should someone approach cutting body fat on your intermediate program? Please answer it, because there are a lot of questions about that. Alright, well, you need to understand that intermediate program I have, I assume you're talking about my off-season linear periodization program, which again is for intermediates. What you need to remember there is still progression there. And so what you need to factor in as far as that goes, you have to assume you're not going to make much strength gains while cutting on it. So if you're going to use it for cutting, you probably need to go ahead and run a full 12-week cycle of it, which means a 12 weeks or 3 months of fat loss. And as you're doing so, maybe cut the weights 5% less to start, so that you have progression through it, but you're not starting at a very difficult point early on in the program. So in other words, if you go do the calculations and you calculate based off of a rep max that you have a 450 squat and say a 285 bench press, don't calculate them as those, reduce them by about 5%. So take those numbers and cut them down to 95% of that, and use that as your calculated assumption for your 1 rep max, and it'll probably be a lot better if you're going to cut. And the other thing to factor in, like with anything else, doing a really slow cut is going to be the best way to go. Don't try to drop 2 or 3 pounds a week. Not going to work when you're on any sort of big heavy strength-based program, because you are going to flounder. But is this a program that you could use successfully to cut? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, but again, you just are going to have to start with lighter weights to deal with the overall progression of it. But I think because there is progression involved, there's a lot of volume with barbell movements involved, and a fair amount of intensity with barbell movements, you could successfully do a cut on this program, as long as you don't start too aggressive on the weights and you leave yourself room for progression to try to help hold onto muscle mass further into it as you continue to go while you're on a cut. Alright, next question. Hi Jason, first time asker, long time viewer. If one is training around an injury such as whiplash and pain suspected to be deferred pain from the neck into the scapula and lat area, do you have any suggestions? Would goblet squats, deadlifts, partial range of motion overhead press, and bench press be enough over 3 days per week to maintain some elbow pain too? You know what, it's really hard to assess this sort of stuff. Again, this is almost something you need to work with your physical therapist on, but is it possible for you to work around an injury like that? Particularly something that's whiplash, because it's not going to affect the rest of the system that much. Yeah, it's possible, but here's what I would recommend. Work with your physical therapist. Hopefully you have one. So hopefully you have someone who can assess your injury for you, some sort of physical therapist who can look at that. You can explain to them that you lift and talk to them about the exercises you want to do and work together with them to find a range of motion or exercise variations that you can do while working around the injury. Because it doesn't matter what an injury is, barring a few exceptions, you can probably train, but you're going to have to find exercise variations that you can do while minimizing your pain without re-aggravating the area, or you're going to have to find ranges of motion that you can do, because you might find on certain exercises you're not going to be able to do full range of motion without re-aggravating that injury, and you don't want to re-aggravate that injury. So again, this is why it's important for you to work with a physical therapist who has access to whatever's going on, your MRIs, x-rays, all of those things, so that they can help you find exercises, ranges of motions, and variation that you still can do, that in fact not just maintain, but maybe even make progress. You know what? Just because you have an injury doesn't mean you can't make progress. And that's something people need to look at also. But again, you're just going to have to be very selective in what you do. And you're going to have to discuss these things and play around a little bit with the exercises while maybe working with your healthcare professional and see if you can't come up with things that are going to work for you. But you know, because the main thing is that you want to be able to train, you want to be able to hold on to what you have, you want to hopefully even be able to make some progress, or and at the very least minimize your losses of muscle mass and strength on a lot of the things that you do while you're healing. And you need to do so in a way that facilitates healing and doesn't detract from the healing process. Because again, that's the most important thing also with any injury in your training, is that you don't set your healing back and that you don't re-injure those aggravated areas. So again, working with your therapist on that is the best thing you can do, and finding things that you can do that don't cause pain and that allow you to continue to train. All right, next question. Hi, Jason. Is there any significant disadvantage of working out late at night, only being able to eat one meal post-workout, then fasting for 8 hours during sleep, as opposed to working out early and being able to eat 3 meals before going to sleep? No, not necessarily. Some people, they'll struggle late at night. For me, working out late at night is very difficult. If I had to pick between, say, working out at midnight after being up a full day, I'm going to do better training early than I am late at night. In other words, if I had to pick between the two versus actually getting some sleep and then training at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. and even going back to bed personally, I get better performance early in the morning if I have to pick between the two. I personally need at least 4 or 5 hours sleep before I train. I just simply do better myself with my gym performance, and that's something that you have to factor in for yourself also. But as far as the meal timing goes, no, absolutely not. You got a meal in. If you get a post-workout meal and then you sleep 8 hours and don't eat immediately after, that's perfectly acceptable. You're still going to gain muscle during that growth window. You're hopefully going to recover because you got food in and you have a 8-hour window. And you know what? You're getting up and eating again. And you need to also realize that you're going to be growing the next night during your sleep also anyways. Right? Your growth window isn't limited to the first little window of sleep right after you train. If you trained hard enough with enough volume, you're going to be growing for a couple of days anyways. You're going to be growing for up to 48 hours after a workout anyways, right? So really it's just about facilitating recovery. And yeah, it's perfectly fine. You shouldn't have any problems there at all. All right, next question. If Batman were real, what do you think his drug stack would be? In a truly gritty world where a man with no superpowers are doing what Bruce Wayne does, there's no way he wouldn't be using PEDs. Yeah, I have to agree with that. I have to agree with that because Batman has always relied upon technology, not any sort of magical powers. And he is very, very strong. And he does train hard and all those things in the comics and everything else. In fact, he's brutally strong. So yeah, he's clearly using some things. I would say it's the same sort of stuff NFL players would use. You know, what do NFL players, anyone who's talked to NFL players, what do they use? They use large amounts of expensive human-grade HGH. That's what they use. And they tend to use conservative amounts of fast-acting testosterone because that's what they can do to get around drug testing. But they rely very heavily on HGH. They rely very heavily on things that help them sleep, which, again, HGH can do that. And then they actually use fairly conservative amounts of testosterone because they're genetically gifted, and the effects of that are amplified by things like growth hormone use. So that's usually what, say, NFL players do, at least anyone who's talked to any, and I have, so I have some idea of what it is that they do, behind closed doors. So I would suspect Batman, being very, very wealthy himself, would probably do something along those lines, because someone in that world, is again fictional character, who is seeking performance, who does have money to spend, would probably talk to the coaches and doctors who work with the best athletes like NFL players. And I think he would end up doing something similar to what they do, because that's what they do. Not necessarily because it might be the best, but because it's expensive, it's within his budget, with him being wealthy, and that's what most of the experts would say, well, this is what I have my NFL guys do. And he would probably do something similar, because that works for them, so it would probably work for him. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.